Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Money. I'm your host Fatima Attarwala, and with me today, my guest today is from a cause that is very dear to my heart, and I hope it's dear to yours too. I have the pleasure to host CEO and President of the Citizen Foundation, Zia Akhtar Abbas. Hello sir, welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me.
So TCF is one organization that when I think of donating, TCF is the first one. I mean, your vision, the way TCF has rolled out education, how it has never been tainted by anything, the accountability, the transparency, everything about TCF has always been very above board. And education in Pakistan is so murky. It is such a challenging proposition that we need multiple TCF, I think, to
Absolutely.
tackle this problem. So I think if I were to start with the biggest question, why don't people want to educate their kids in Pakistan?
Why don't people?
Yeah, what's the biggest challenge? Why do we have so many out-of-school children?
That's the most incredible thing, because we have this resting assumption that people don't want to educate their kids in Pakistan. In Punjab, they did a LEAPS study, which asked villagers, what do you want from the government? And the number one thing was a job. And the number two thing was, ahead of clean drinking water, ahead of health, a secondary school. So when we open a school in an absolute, out of, middle of nowhere kind of location, we have a line outside the school. I want to tell you the story of this school in the middle of Punjab. We had just taken over a government school, and it was wheat harvesting season. And there was a line outside a boys' government school, and an old woman was fighting with the gatekeeper to let her and her daughter inside. And I had to go and talk to her, like, we'll get into trouble with the government if we admit her. This is a boys' government school, and how come you're here? This is wheat harvesting season. Aren't you all supposed to be really busy? But parents are willing to take the opportunity cost if the state or the system outside the state gives them an option of quality education. Parents see, and every parent actually, no matter what class they belong to, want to see their child go beyond them, do better than them, and get better opportunities. And in today's world, there is no household which truly misses or does not see the real value of a quality education. So this in Pakistan, education is a supply problem. Sure, there are pockets where culture or circumstances don't let households send their kids to school, especially girls. And there are very real reasons why those kids don't get to go to school. But it's not because of lack of intent or demand. Fundamentally, it's the absence of quality supply, accessible supply, affordable supply, close to where these households
It's
are.
like when you go down defense and you see these small kids covered in paint standing all day begging.
Right.
And how do you go convince their parents that this child who has a contract to buy, instead of begging, he should be or she should be in school?
Right.
I mean, I don't even imagine the kind of they have no protection
Right.
on the roads, but in school at least they have some kind of future.
Right.
So I mean, how do you deal with such problems?
So this is something we as a society have to confront, that the poorest of the poor, the child actually doesn't get that option at all. He or she becomes part of an economy almost, which profits from the child's existence. Only when parents within that or above that economic strata are able to make the opportunity cost choices, they have just enough to survive, and they're willing to let go of the time and energy of that young person and invest that for the long term. Only there is an organization like TCF or the public schooling system able to do anything. So this is an absolute truth, that poverty is crushing, and sometimes it's poverty and sometimes it's greed. But if the child becomes part of an economic system, it's very hard to wrest that away. But kudos and credit to parents belonging to very poor households all over Pakistan who are making massive financial and opportunity cost choices to send their kids to school. There are about 75 million kids of school-going age. We all know about a third of them, a little bit more than a third of them are out of school. But the rest, about 50 million odd, are in school, and 46% of them are going to non-state school, where the parent
That's
is...
another problem.
Right.
We don't trust government schools, the kind of
Right.
education. I mean, they rather go to a more expensive bottom of the barrel to
Right.
private education schools. Like
Right.
even my maid, her stepson has been going to school for years. Like he's a teenager now. He still cannot read and write
Right.
in any language.
Right.
But they're still willing to fork out money for that kind of education. So you're absolutely right. The demand is there, but the quality of education, it has become a business across the different, be it the really expensive KJS baby frobbles, or the really poor, the mom and pop stores inside the house. So within that economy, what is the value proposition of TCF?
Sure. I think this is a key thing that you've just said. It is not just an access problem, it is a learning at scale problem. Parents want to send their kids to a school which actually delivers a value proposition. In the primary grades, when you get the parent coming in for the second or the third parent-teacher meeting, you hear back from them statements like, oh, my child can talk now. He knows how, or she knows how to sit and behave. She challenges me on the fact that I don't brush my teeth. She has taught me how to drink tea. Those will be some of the cues that the child will take into the household. In grade 3 or 4, they will learn to properly read and write and with comprehension. And that is a huge value in a society which essentially assumes that everybody will be able to read and write, even though they know that people can't. Only when you go beyond primary schooling into secondary do trade-offs about economic matters become very, very real. And parents are having to make choices. Do we keep this child in school, or do we get them, especially the boys, into some sort of vocation? So while we continue to focus on girls' education, and it is a huge leverage to social uplift, boys are actually the ones which are facing the most pressure as they move into secondary years to be taken out of the system and actually put into some sort of learning, skill vocation or earning. Yeah. And that economic pressure is very real. It's very hard to keep boys engaged when they get into grade 8 and they know that eventually they can't pursue this all the way to university. So the economy, poverty, financial realities, they're actually intertwined with the education process. And our job in TCF, the way we see it, is to keep convincing parents and households of this value proposition of making their kids continue on their journey. And second, now increasingly taking whatever we've learned to the ecosystem and helping the public and private sector run better schools so that kids outside of our system can go into thriving schools as well.
So what's the cost per child of a TCF, a TCF student versus the cost per child of, say, an education, government sector school?
Sure. So it takes only 4,300 rupees to educate a child per month in a TCF school. Part of that is depreciation, you take that out, which is non-cash. Part of that is actually about 300 schools is the total contribution that parents make into the process through the token fees we charge or the little bit of money that we charge.
How much is the fees?
So it starts at 50 rupees. And the idea is for the household to pay as much as they can, which we estimate to be about 5% of the household income. So they have skin in the game. And the child and the parent both have this dignity in the process, this stake in the process that we're sending them to a school, not just a charity school. Never should a child be turned away from a TCF school because they can't afford it. So given that tiny little bit of parental contributions, the net deficit we have is about 3,600, 3,700 rupees a child a month. And this kind of compares very closely with the number you would be able to calculate for the public sector. But the fact is, the public sector is very different. If you talk to people who've been secretaries of education, they'll say the cost per child is actually 2 to 3 times what it costs in TCF, primarily because of accounting differences, but also it assumes a level of enrollment which we all know is hugely overstated. When you go to a school, the data in the public sector system will say there are 80 kids here. When you actually go there, there are 20 kids sort of doing nothing. And also imagine what we are running is a fully functional school, an effective school with a full cohort of faculty, etc. In a typical school, let's say if there are 150,000 public schools in Pakistan, about half of them have 2 or less teachers. So imagine an entire primary school.
How could an entire primary school be on less than 2 teachers? I mean,
So
there's just one person sitting, standing,
Right.
yelling? This is not doable.
Exactly. So this is the reality of a typical public school classroom, that you have even if there is a well-intentioned, well-trained teacher, you have 3 different grade groups within a same room, if there is a room, and she or he is trying to teach grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3 together. It is an insane task to give anyone, and yeah, that's our reality today.
So I was looking at your annual report of 2024, and I noticed that your donation and fees has just had a marginal bump, just like a 4% bump. And I'm just wondering, are people less in the spirit of giving now?
No, I think Alhamdulillah, I think what we have found in the last 5 years, while this may be
I was just wondering, because it's like
1 year,
what, 11.3 billion versus 11.9 billion. So it's like, doesn't even account for inflation.
Right. I think what we've seen over the last 5 years is a fantastic trend in donations. It is always an existential issue for a non-profit. We try and keep 6 months of cash in case donations dry up.
It's my understanding that you're tax exempt from the US as well.
Absolutely.
Like, I think in some previous interview that I did with Ehsan Salim Saab, he mentioned that TCF had applied for the status during when the whole 9/11 thing was happening.
True.
So TCF was under extra scrutiny, and then because you pass the scrutiny, so you have the diaspora sending as well.
We are tax exempt in UK, Canada, UAE, of course the US, and many other European countries as well. And to be a Pakistani charity or a charity with a Pakistani kind of program that is funding, and be tax exempt, and not just tax exempt, but be regarded really and respected, you have to really, be above board. You have to walk on water. So in terms of governance, transparency, corporate governance, and the standards you adhere to, you have to almost take no risks. We are therefore extremely cautious.
Actually, I was wondering, isn't that a huge challenge? You have money flowing in from abroad.
Yeah.
You have billions of rupees for budget in a country that is known for its corruption. So how do you run a ship that tight?
Yeah, you have to, and that is at 2 levels. One is the formal kind of structure that the founders and the board have always put in, which is a very strong, robust governance structure, which is independent from management. This is a typical non-profit challenge, especially in Pakistan. The founder is also the CEO. But from day one, TCF has had a very clear separation between governance and management.
That is very huge.
And that makes a huge difference. The second thing is culture, Fatma. Right down to the people in the school. If they have what we call in Urdu dard, or the pain of each cent being a token of trust from a donor, then you manage the organization in a very different way. We have taken pains and refused grants, even from non-Pakistani sort of global foundations. If we felt that we ticked all the boxes, but hand on heart, we wouldn't be able to do justice to what the intent of that foundation was. We've gone back and returned millions of dollars to people if we feel we not do justice to the donations. Our founders have gotten into planes, went to a person's home in the US and apologized if we made an error in situating a school in not the best location, and offered to return the money. And that level of accepting your mistakes, being absolutely transparent about them, and being absolutely upfront, that's what it takes for people to trust you. Not just people who are close to you, but globally. Because then people tell other people, right, that this is the kind of organization it is. It is not just going to be something you're going to be able to advertise about. It has to be a felt, lived experience when you meet somebody from the organization. They need to be able to look you in the eye and say, yes, I'm inside the organization and money spent well. And I think if we can manage to do that as we scale and sustain this program, that's the number one task. Because the biggest asset we have is the trust that people have in us.
Undoubtedly. So there's another debate that's been going on. There is charity there are a lot of hungry people. And then you give them food, but then you say you give man a fish, he eats for a day. So this is a more productive form of charity. So my question would be that how do you, I'm not framing this very well, right? This thing is that even though education is the long-term perspective, if somebody is hungry today, they need the food now. For them, that is the priority. So again, it comes down to this: how do you have a program and outreach that goes to parents and explains to them that yes, this is worth the sacrifice today for a better future tomorrow. Like, I mean, Rehbar program, for example,
Sure.
is, my husband was part of it.
Wow.
So, you know, to give the kids a vision beyond
Sure.
beyond their own homes, beyond
Yeah.
the doors in which there are abusive people, and it's a very different kind of living for them.
Yeah. This is at the heart of running TCF, frankly, because there are two kinds of charities or causes. One is a consumptive cause which does meet a really urgent need today, and then the other is a transformative cause which will change the need tomorrow. Whenever you're lower down in the hierarchy of needs, you're dealing with existential issues, it's very hard to think long term and self-actualization. But both to parents on one side and to donors on the other, what we've been able to demonstrate is that actually this is great investment. Because kids who are coming out of TCF, at least a fifth of them, 20% or so, go on to universities. I mean, in fact, our latest data shows 26% of TCF's graduating cohort goes on to university and graduate from there. That is higher than many other countries and the systems that they run in much more well-endowed kind of economies. And then what do? 61% are employed. That includes both boys and girls. And the incomes they earn are many multiples higher than their household income when they exited TCF system. So there is a real economic argument to it, but underneath that, I think it's good decisions across the financial decisions one makes, but also life decisions. Who you marry, how do you raise your kids, whether you focus on education, whether you focus on health in a progressive way or not. If you're running a business, do you make sound decisions in that business? I think education fundamentally gives you that critical reasoning, that thought process, which enables you in all these dimensions. So we are able to, and have been, alhamdulillah, been able to convince people of that and demonstrate that after 30 years of kids going out there. Every top university in Pakistan, if you go in, and I've had this fantastic experience, you go to IBA, you go to GIK, and if you're talking to a cohort of kids, afterwards 3 of them will walk up to you and say, "Sir, I'm actually from TCF."
Wow.
And that feeling of not being able to tell them, if I'm just looking at the crowd, not being able to differentiate that this child was from that kind of neighborhood is success for us. So yeah, I think this is beyond sort of argument now, because we have been able to demonstrate, and many others other than us as well. Education is the big silver bullet, if you want to, because there is nothing more unjust than a child being born on the other side of the tracks and not having the opportunity. And then once you give them the opportunity, especially these kids who are street smart, who are resilient, who are hungry, they just invest themselves in that entire journey. So we are seeing a fantastic success, and I think donors and parents are also seeing that.
What advice would you give to others, NGO kind of schools, that if they want to have that success, if they want to scale up? How many schools does TCF?
So we have just crossed 2,000.
2,000 schools. So there are a lot of good people. A lot of people who try to have a school, have 2 schools, but 2,000 schools, that's an entire institution.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to them?
Fatima, I think what I've learned after spending 10, 11 years at TCF is there is no shortcut to institution building. And a lot of times the best intentions, great money, go straight into creating the biggest and most visible impact today. I think there is no shortcut to governance, to process, to systems and structures, to great talent, to management, to proper management, right? And that prioritizing those things and building capability, I think we are seeing a fantastic crop of new non-profits emerging, especially in Karachi, but all over Pakistan, who are seeing some of these examples like TCF, but many other amazing examples, and investing in institution building upfront. Building a cohort, a bench strength of talented managers who have experience of running companies and other enterprises. I think that is critical. The second thing, like we talked about a minute ago, focusing on governance and transparency so that you can get the support. We often say this, fundraising, frankly, is critical to our existence. but we don't treat it like a hobby. We don't treat it, we really bring all of the management discipline that we've learned in running companies and businesses to this task. This task actually is more important than any for-profit enterprise that we've been part of in our individual lives. So we bring all that expertise and structure to this because this is urgent and it is important for the society that we live in. So I would definitely say separate governance and management, focus on institution building, build a genuine trust-based relationship with your donor community. You know, we raise about $55 million a year globally, TCF Pakistan and all its affiliates. And to raise that kind of money, the number of people who are employed to ask donors for money, probably less than 15, 20 globally. So how are we able to do that? We've built a community of volunteers all over the world who treat TCF as their own. We have this little line, we say we want owners, not donors. And I mean, I was in Europe the other 2 years ago, and I was in small cafes talking to Pakistanis who lived there, telling them about TCF, trying to get their support, and they were like, okay, where's your event? What's your fundraising target? And I had to tell them, I have no event, I have zero fundraising target. I'm here to just invite you to be part of this journey. Do you want to become a stakeholder and a shareholder of TCF? Because then you'll tell me how to operate in Germany or Switzerland or wherever. If you can build a community of support like that, and I think when people see TCF, they see fundraising happening in North America, and there's a great deal of sort of curiosity of how we do that. We don't do it by organizing events. We do it by genuinely investing in those little communities and making them not just feel like owners, but treating them like owners. So every 2 years, we would have a room where 200 of these people would descend in Karachi, and we would treat them, it would be like a shareholder meeting. We would tell them how the organization is doing. We would tell them about our deepest challenges and our faults and our mishaps and our mistakes. And we would renew their trust in the platform for the next 2 and 4 and 10 years. I think that level of investment in community building is also critical, because as we have seen, building organizations on grantor money or government money, especially foreign governments, you've seen what happened recently.
USAID has been
just pulled out,
so many
right?
NGOs were like, oh my God, and
It is seismic. I mean, there are fantastic NGOs doing great work in Pakistan who have just had the rug pulled out from under them.
It came out of the blue.
Right. So I think TCF can also be a model for those organizations to build an organic, base of support anchored in your own community. Even if we are in the US, we're talking to people who've grown up here. Even if we're talking to their children who've born and grown up in the US, we will essentially talk to them about creating an affinity with this child in our school. If we can do that, then we don't need to be afraid of governmental changes, policy changes, regulatory changes. I think that's the way to build a sustainable and scalable organization.
Well, that might be that takes a lot of passion, a lot of heart, and I can imagine NGOs doing that. But what advice would you give to the government? At the start of the conversation, you mentioned that you're taking over a government school.
Right.
So, I mean, why can't the government do what you're doing?
Sure. So first of all, I want us to just acknowledge that it is a really large and complex problem. We are a very large country, multiple languages, complexity in governance across the board anyway. 75 million kids is one of the largest populations of school-going age kids in the world. Just our out-of-school population is bigger than Australia's population. So acknowledging the complexity that government policymakers and practitioners have. I think in TCF we have 5 elements of our model. It starts with governance, and that's where a big chunk of the challenge emanates in the public sector. Across all the provinces and the federal government, education is the biggest employer in Pakistan. It's bigger than the Pakistan Army. It's bigger than any institution. And we have treated that as a means of giving jobs to people. Fundamentally, we need to de-link today's urgency for giving jobs to young people who have come out of this education system and therefore are only marginally employable. We have to stop trading away tomorrow for today. And today's politics and today's votes will not get you tomorrow's success. So I think that sits at the heart. We've treated education and the school jobs as means of getting votes. And if we can delink that, if we can stop giving legal cover to truly poor performance and letting policymakers actually manage it, that's the first thing. The second is we have realized that in the middle of nowhere, when you run a school, the leader of the school can make or break a school. When you walk into a TCF school and you can almost measure and feel a good school from a bad school, it almost always is up to a good school leader or a bad school leader. The government sector really needs to invest in school leadership. Instead, it is concentrated power and money at the provincial level, and thankfully it is at the provincial level, otherwise it used to be in Islamabad. But we need to devolve power and money all the way down and really empower school leaders. The third thing is all of us work to outcomes. If we know that in the end, if a child knows that in the end I'll be in a room where the examination is going to be happening in an environment full of cheating, and it is going to be a rote-based examination, where I am going to be asked questions in a language that I've never understood, that my teacher has never understood, and I just have to memorize this paragraph from page number 6, which is going to be the answer to question number 2, and question number 2 hasn't come for 3 years, so it's going to come this year. If I know this, why would I study? If I'm smart, I wouldn't study. So we have moved all of TCF to a new examination board, the Federal Examination Board. Incredibly hard, totally concept-based, better invigilated, and the kids are going through a real tough time, and so are the teachers. But unless you raise the bar at the assessments level, the entire chain will take it easy. So I think it is a very solvable problem, even though it's complex. And TCF at 2,000 school units shows that at a fraction of the cost, in the most remote and impoverished regions of Pakistan, using Pakistani talent, using Pakistani money, you can solve it at scale. We are what the Economist calls the largest network of independent schools in the world. It's not just a Pakistani success story, it is something that the world has recognized as having solved a very cross-country kind of foundation literacy problem, foundation numeracy problem. So I think we really need to look inside. We have all the, and not just TCF, fantastic organizations who are doing great work here. We just need to de-link policy from the political economy of education and really connect it to the long-term outcomes for these young people.
Basically, the governments need to educate children for education and not to get votes.
Right. And we need to realize even these votes, even tomorrow's economies, tomorrow's traffic in the streets, tomorrow semblance of a functioning society cannot happen unless we make this choice today. Without education, no country is developed.
Absolutely. You mentioned the importance of a school leader. So what kind of investment do you make in teachers at TCF?
Oh,
and how much do you pay
massive.
them? Is it like the minimum wage? Or
Sure. So for every teaching job, the salary that they would get is probably 2 to 3 times the next best salary that they would get. Teaching jobs in the low-fee private sector are very low paid, and TCF has shown that as soon as it has achieved any room in finances, for instance, we did have a fantastic trajectory of donations in the last 5 years. We invested deeply in the teachers and their sort of financial well-being. So that is critical. What I found is that once you get kids, these teachers investing not just in their content knowledge, but also in their pedagogical skills, their ability to handle a classroom, their ability to plan a lesson. We have really cracked this, I think, over time. And though we continue to improve that 110 hours of training and development that every teacher gets every year, I think we would be 2x of what the public sector is able to provide. That is critical, because the raw material is coming out of the same education system. So we test our teachers every year.
What is the minimum requirement to be a teacher?
Sometimes you can have whatever requirements, but you're only going to get a matric graduate in that village, right? So the key is to be able to bring in whatever is available, but then really develop their competence on content knowledge and teaching. And so we test them. We tell them in a really data-enabled way what their weak points are, We make available resources for them to develop themselves. We train them in classroom. And we allow that trajectory of self-development to happen at every teacher level so that they can enable a good classroom. I think that is critical to any system. Of every 100 rupees that we spend on education, about 66%, 66 rupees go into the compensation, transportation, and training of teachers.
Okay, so do you provide pick and drop as well?
So this is critical in Pakistan.
Yeah, absolutely. For
Right?
most of the female participation.
For women in cities, it is.
Yeah.
We run schools where there is no education. So by definition, in the first generation, you'll have to bus them in. So we run a massive transportation, 700 to 800 vehicles,
Wow.
travel 75,000 kilometers every day, busing a girl, a young woman from a home to school and back. Some of these young women and older matrons spend 1.5 hours in transportation every day just to get to school and back. So sometimes transportation is the biggest enabler to the right school culture and great school outcomes, because you're able to get talent from where talent is available. Also, for Pakistan, it is a critical thing because transportation is safety, it's security, it's dignity, especially if you've resolved to be a 100% female network. All our schools are not only the teachers, but all school leaders are females.
Talk about women empowerment
Right.
and walking the talk.
So we have 23,000 employees and 85% of them are women.
Wow.
I am a very poor representative of the organization. Our management team, our next cohort, they're more than half women, and really
I think you're one of the largest private sector employers of
Right.
women in Pakistan.
we are. Like I said, 85% of 23,000 are all women. And that changes the character of the school's relationship with the parent as well. Because this woman is the most senior female opinion leader in the village. The Maulvi Sahab, the police inspector, the local powers that be, all of them are male. And this is someone who actually has power and influence, who has a long-term positive
That's
effect.
a lot of cultural that you're taking on. I mean, there must be a lot of pushback to that as well.
There is.
And also cultural transformation when you have female, and because when you see a female
when you
leader,
see
when you're
a female, yes.
inspired to be one.
Imagine growing up as a young boy in a community where outside women are told to be quiet, and inside the space is controlled by women. I think that symbolism is very powerful. But imagine in a village, TCF head office can only do so much to support and protect and secure that school. It is really that amazing, incredible school leader who's negotiating with the local jagirdar, the local government authorities, the local mosque, everyone, and of course the parents and community leaders, to not just protect but help the school and get their support for the school. So you would have the mosque sometimes making antagonistic announcements in the first day, but by the second year the Maulvi Sahib is sending his own girls to school. And that relationship building is pure magic and happens at the school level.
And what it builds on what you said, strong school leaders. In your case, it's females.
Right. And so imagine the talent we as a country are foregoing when we have such low female participation in the labor force. Right? We are finding that girls are outshining boys in academic results, in university kind of admissions. And no wonder, right? Because really they're empowered by a system which is built around them. Just to give you a quick example, for every 500 meters that a girl child has to walk to school, female enrollment falls by 15%. So if the school is far away, marginally fewer boys will end up in schools, but far fewer girls will end up in schools. And you can imagine why. Parents are scared of the environment and they don't want their girl walking to. So small things like that. TCF decided to build small schools embedded in the heart of communities rather than large complexes farther away. And that has changed the fact and enabled us to keep a 50-50 gender ratio in schools. The female teachers enable us to keep that, right? Small things in the design of the program enable large long-term outcomes. And what we are seeing is these girls are going out and changing the communities. They're becoming not just amazing homemakers and mothers, but professionals, and they're running not just other schools, but other enterprises in the community. They stay in the community. They don't go to the nearest city. So they really change the complexion of the community in a generation.
And this is a grassroots micro level. We're not talking about doing something at the top and trickling down. This is each generation being impacted at a very real level and not just words.
And in a long-term, sort of enduring way. We find that it has generational impact when a girl gets educated. Research has found that when a girl is taken across secondary schooling, then 10 years later, you see a mushrooming of schools in that community. We've seen that in Punjab because secondary schooling for girls became very prevalent there earlier. But in all of Sindh, all of rural Sindh, the total number of secondary schools serving girls is maybe less than 600 in this massive province. So we are working to build hundreds of schools just taking girls to secondary level so that we can unlock this opportunity in our own province.
Wow, this is also inspirational. I'm out of questions. Actually, just one last question that I wanted to ask was, what's the breakup of your donations? So most of it is from corporate Pakistan, is it abroad? Is this from individual donors?
So the founders started with a maxim which was one donor, one school. They thought there was enough wealth at the top of the pyramid for us to get just the major donors, and that would take care of the 1,000 schools they were targeting. Actually, it took even less than 1,000 donors to fund the first 1,000 at that level. The bulk of the money still comes from major donors, but it's important to understand about 40–45% comes from Pakistan and the rest comes from abroad. But generally, the money is not come from mainstream Western foundations or governments. It's come from diaspora communities, and that has been a huge source of our sustainable sort of funding base. So like I said, about $55 million a year. US, Canada, UK, and UAE are the big centers for our fundraising. And it is fundamentally based on that notion that they are owners of this platform. TCF recognizes that education is like gardening. If somebody walks in and gives me $50 million today, I wouldn't know what to do with that because I need a little bit of money over 11 years just to take a kid from KG to metric. And without that sort of holding the organization's hand through years and years, without that kind of support, we would have a very kind of erratic organization. So we've been very conscious of choosing who we seek support from. At one point, as much as 20% of our funding used to come from grantors and big institutions and big foundations and governments. And we've consciously reduced that percentage over time so that we can make it more organic and sort of self-sustaining.
So I was talking to the head of a very big NGO earlier, a year or two ago, and he mentioned that it is not the feudal Pakistan that gives the most money, it is the business families that give the most money, the trading families. Has that been true for you too?
It is. In fact, there are big geographic differences. Every NGO manager or leader would tell you Karachi is a very giving city. Karachi is a place where various ethnic communities have a long tradition of giving. You know, whether it's Parsis or Boris or, you know, there's this massive base of public institutions built through philanthropy in Karachi. And you know, there's the Maiman community. So you have them thinking that this is part of their business P&L. This is part of their cost of doing business that they have to give. It's almost like a problem that they have, which a dependable, reliable institution then solves. That's actually how we think. So when there's a company operating a factory in the middle of nowhere, and they have to do something for the community they're a part of, we become part of their operation. If you're the company, you will fix the road outside your factory which leads to the main road, and you will fund the school in the community. We run that school for that company. And so then it becomes almost like the business owner saying, oh yeah, my school with TCF. I have to do this with, for that school this year. it's a huge part of how we've been able to do that in Pakistan. And similarly, communities playing that role outside of Pakistan, where let's say Houston, the Pakistani community in Houston will say, these 20 schools are our schools with TCF. And it's literally called Houston Campus 14 and Seattle Campus 10. And that, it's funny, in the middle of nowhere in rural Sindh, you'll find, Silicon Valley campus. And that is a relationship that we've been able to kind of curate.
I think that's been the biggest asset that TC has, is that trust, that bond, that's across the seas, in fact.
So we have three kinds of donors. Somebody gives us land for free, typically somebody who's from the community. Somebody else gives us the money to build the school, and somebody else sometimes funds the school. The build donor, sometimes, not always do they fund the school. Why do they get connected to this location? It's because we are able to underwrite, no matter what happens, this school will keep running, inshallah, right? And we are accountable to all of you. So even if the build donor built a school 20 years ago, we still send them a report. Even if they're not funding the school anymore, we still send them a report on how the school is doing. And that platform, right, they tell people that I gave some money 20 years ago. I haven't done anything since, but the school is still running here. There are photos. So that platform existing, which allows people who want to do something to come, and that is just donors. The biggest thing is volunteers. Thousands of people. Right now we're closing our summer camp. Lots of young people in all over Pakistan are coming in and spending time with 5th graders. You mentioned the Rebel program. I was a Rebel before I was an employee at TCF. You go in and you see these 8th graders who don't know what they're capable of, and all you're trying to tell them is, you have every right and every capability to make it anywhere. You're just unlocking that aspiration. And I think that the role that volunteers play in TCF is critical. It's essential to TCF, because many years later you'll see that kid talking to a room full of people, pointing out to, Siraj Bhai was my Rebel mentor. And he said something to me which opened my mind, and now I'm standing here thanks to. Imagine what Siraj Bhai feels, right?
I mean, if I wasn't working on Saturdays, I think I would like to do a Rebel program.
So that is critical.
Wow. I mean, I am so happy to have you on my show. This was such an inspirational, uplifting discussion. And I think what I found the most inspiring was that education is such a huge, complex problem, but it is solvable.
It's very solvable.
As long as people have skin in the game, as well as there are people like you and people who are invested. And if we have leaders, political leaders like that, then I think that, and if we could solve education and vaccinations, clean drinking water, so many of our problems can get solved. Mob violence, all of that a lot of that can come down if there is just more education.
Right. Education is the most sort of humanly complex problem to solve, because it's a relationship between a teacher and student, right? So some other problems are much more functional and technical in nature. If you can solve this, like you said, you can solve for a lot. I think the first thing though that we need to solve for is the lack of hope. TCF has become a powerful symbol that things are possible. So it attracts people if they want to be hopeful and optimistic about being and living in Pakistan and raising our kids here. So first of all, we as citizens need to commit that we will build rather than complain. And I think when you made that turn, then whether it's TCF, whether it's one of these other fantastic NGOs, whether it's public service, you will find your way. I think the fundamental thing we as citizens must do is we have to commit to this country and its future. I think there's lots that we can accomplish, and TCF is just a small example of what is possible.
Yeah, I hope that the country sees many more organizations like TCF in the future. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for coming to my show.
Lovely being here. Thank you for the
It was a pleasure
opportunity.
having you.